Hello, happy Friday. I got some nice light coming in from the outside, which is just illuminating all the dust that is on my keyboard and my monitor and my other monitor. Yuck. Well, happy Friday to you. Welcome to the weekly OSR Reddit Roundup. I don't think I have any programming notes to speak of, so we can just get right into it. Let me grab my window. Where's my window? Let's see. I guess I can now. Tab, right? All right, tab grabbed. Here we go. Let me give it another refresh. On the hot tab, as per our usual. Hey, Elfbait. Glad you made it. As usual, I have not pre-read any of these. I'm just going to scroll through and see which ones seem interesting and go from there. There's one right at the top that's got my interest called Brutal DMing. Let's check this one out. Oh, it's an image. Image of a conversation. I don't know. Probably, maybe if you didn't get their permission, probably should post this. So it's an image of a chat between three people, and all three of them, unfortunately, are named in there. I feel like I'm sharing, so it's. How do I even close this? Can I close it? Yeah. All right. I'll skip that one. I thought it was maybe something anonymized. Hey, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, Lonnie. Thanks for having you. All right, I'm going to skip over the bad DMing one. I feel kind of bad for even showing it as much as I did since they didn't cross out the names. Let's keep going down. See what else we have. Drawing dungeons. Isometrically. Isometric is fine. Favorite designs. Session reports. Do you read them, like them, write them? Sure. All the above. Let's see. Oh, let's try this one. Do the monster mashup. Combining classic monsters to create new spooky creatures. That sounds good, right? Sounds good to me. Hey, Fluffy the Griffin. Welcome, welcome. I will post this link in the chat. This was posted on October 22nd to the Prismatic Wasteland blog. Do the monster mashup. All right, posted on October 22nd. It is a truth universally acknowledged that monster design is not dissimilar from mixology, the art of crafting cocktails. Okay, I'm not sure I'd heard that before, but sure, why not? Chris McDowell has explained how taking the mixologist mindset to monster crafting can twist classic monsters, e.g. the Lich, into new monsters by altering certain aspects. But what if you aren't replacing gin with whiskey in your cocktail recipe? Imagine a deranged bartender who combines half of a martini and half of an old-fashioned into one glass. It may be awful and reminiscent of a Jersey Turnpike, also known as a bar mat cocktail, a drink produced by pouring all of the liquid still spilled onto the bar mat at the end of the night into a shot glass. Gross. But maybe it's more like an Arnold Palmer. What does this have to do with tabletop role-playing games? What does it have to do indeed? Taking a similar approach to monster building, I will mash up a few combinations of classic, potentially, Halloween monsters to produce new monsters. Combining two things is a tried and true method for monster creation. The owlbear may have been invented because of an oddly shaped child's toy, but it is an enduring and classic monster. I will be using the universal classic monsters for my vile experiments. Dracula, Frankenstein, the Mummy, Wolfman, and Creature from the Black Lagoon. All right, so we are feeling the holiday spirit, the Halloween holiday spirit. First up, Dracula. In my opinion, Dracula, the poster boy for vampires everywhere, is Halloween's most iconic monster. But what is at the core of Dracula? It is a parasitic entity. In the classic formulation, this is represented both metaphorically, Dracula is a member of the nobility who are societal leeches, and quite literally, Dracula drinks blood. Everything else is a bit of set dressing. So now they have Count Francula. Mix Frankenstein's Frankenstein monster with Dracula, and you get Count Francula. Please don't laugh at the terrible names I have for these monsters hybrids. I am doing my best. For this monster, imagine an entity similar to Count Dracula, except instead of drinking the blood of the peasants dying in the countryside, Count Francula is constantly kidnapping unsuspecting commoners and taking their body parts to replace its own. Imagine an NPC from the town that the players have a relationship with goes missing. When they meet Count Francula, they notice its eyes are identical to the missing NPC. Perhaps at dinner, if one of the players has too much to drink, Count Francula compliments them by remarking what a strong liver they must have. The Count will visit them that night. Elfbait in the chat says, I do this all the time with monsters. I've combined mummy rot with an umber hulk to make the scarab hulk, or a type of fungus with shambling mounds. Yep, I agree. Hey, Laura Martinelli, welcome. Glad you could make it. We are looking at Do the Monster Mashup from the Prismatic Wasteland blog. One of the things with this Count Francula, right? So we're mixing Frankenstein's monster with Count Dracula to get the concept of, I guess, in a more intelligent Frankenstein's monster going and replacing its body parts. I don't know that we need the mashup to do that, since it kind of seems inherent in the premise somewhat of Frankenstein's monster, maybe, that they replace body parts. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But it's kind of cool. It might have been interesting to kind of do it the other way. What if Dracula, as he's drinking the essence of people, gets some looks so that Dracula drinks some blood of your NPC friend, and yeah, they have their eyes kind of like the, I don't want to skip ahead because I don't know what they're going to do on the blog, but that concept from the beginning of the Mummy movie, where the mummy is going after the people who took its canoptic jars and stealing bits of them to replenish its own body. All right, next we have Fluffy the Dark. This is Fluffy the Dark. Fluffy the Griffin says, wow, this is dark. Organ stealing. It is indeed, Fluffy. This is dark. Dark as night. Count Wolfula. The noble Count Wolfula is a cross between Dracula and the Wolfman. Honestly, this mashup is one of the hardest because vampires and werewolves are pretty similar. They are shape-shifting creatures of the night. The main difference is whether they control the shift and if they mostly turn into wolves or bats. Complete aside, it is weird to me that the vampires in Twilight never turn into bats, unless you count one of them getting cast as the new Batman. Bum. Werewolves are often cast as losing control and perhaps not even remembering their transformation, whereas vampires are always in complete control. So Count Wolfula differs from your standard vampire by transforming into a wolf, not a bat. But it also differs from your standard werewolf by being in control of this transformation. To emphasize this point, I think I would make it capable of human speech while in full wolf form. Hopefully that comes off as scary, but I suspect it comes off as adorable. Who doesn't love a talking dog? Suppose it depends if that talking dog's about to jump you and then drain your blood through its Dracula heritage. So there we get a couple of Dracula mashups. Now we're on to Frankenstein. The core identity of Frankenstein, I'm going to start saying Frankenstein and not Frankenstein's monster. Please be chill about this. Is the method of its creation. It is an amalgamation of the dead brought back to life via science. Frankenstein has a special place in my heart because too often monster stories position the magical and the mystical as the source of all evil. Frankenstein says, nah, man, science can be used for spooky stuff. All right. So we get Frankenwolf. Or Frankenwolf, maybe? Honestly, Frankenwolf has many possibilities. It could be a typical Frankenstein that gets bit by a werewolf. Or it could be a Frankenstein created out of the corpse of one or more werewolves. My preference is that it is the process of a science experiment gone wrong in which the scientist was trying to develop sentient wolves. So they took an especially vicious and deranged wolf and began replacing its body parts bit by bit with human parts, human arms, human legs, and human heart, and eventually a human brain. Without human vocal cords, that's right, we are done with talking dogs for this blog post. No more talking dogs. The human consciousness trapped in the wolf-human hybrid body is filled with murderous rage, particularly for its creators. Elfbait says, how about a werewolf that preys on other lycanthropes, drinking their curse and making itself a more powerful werewolf in doing so? I definitely like that. I guess this would be more on the was it I don't know, Wolfiel, Count Wolfiel. Well, yeah, definitely. I could that seems like a really, really neat idea. And aren't there some werewolves aren't always, I guess the classic ones are kind of, they just go into they go down back to animal intelligence, but I don't think that's always true in all the tales. But I'm not an expert on werewolf lore, so I will leave it to other folks more lore wise than I to make that decision. Now we get to Experiment from the Black Lagoon. Cold War era scientists, in an effort to drastically improve the underwater fighting skills of their soldiers, are hard at work on developing a new type of marine, one that can exist underwater. So, a submarine? Similar to the above example, they reanimate a valiant soldier who died in the global fight against communism, but first, give them all men or fish parts, gills, fins, fish eyes, the works. And for good measure, they inject the resulting creation with super serum, which was lying around in bulk at the time in question. In a completely unforeseeable turn of events, the resulting monstrosity escaped its captivity. Now it haunts a nearby lake, perhaps even this lake town, which I'm not going to link to, just to stay on point. Now we get to the mummy. The mummy is defined by where it's found. It is a tomb monster. Just like people say Frankenstein's monster isn't the monster, Dr. Frankenstein is the monster. The mummy isn't the monster. The person breaking into their tomb is the monster. Note that I am drawing from the common cultural impression of mummies in modern America, which doesn't necessarily reflect certain historical mummies with any level of accuracy. A historical mummy would make a bad D&D monster owing to the fact that they are an inert corpse, not actually the living dead. The first mashup here being Pharaoh Dracula. Let's see, let me hit the chat real quick. Fluffy the Griffin says, I like making all dire animals infected vectors of lycanthropy. It makes them a bit more dangerous and less like wolves and bears, the sequel. I like that. I like that phrase, infected vectors of lycanthropy. So do dire animals transform themselves, or do they just carry that curse of transformation with them? Would be my question, but I like it. So Pharaoh Dracula. Count Dracula and the typical mummy share the trait of being nobility, in the popular conception at least. In reality, Egyptian mummification is believed to have been practiced by members of various social ranks. So I am making their mashup a famous varietal of the Egyptian nobility, the pharaoh. However, I don't think the bat motif of vampires fits as well for the mummy vibe. A different animal, however, was a frequent subject of mummification, the cat. Perhaps this pharaoh is entombed beneath their pyramid not because they died, but because they were cursed. It isn't the tomb of a noble, it is the prison of a monster. And the pharaoh was still, of course, buried with their servants who in unlife served the pharaoh as thralls. Like typical vampires, the pharaoh can transform either into a partially feline monstrosity or into a simple cat, ideal for catching its victims off guard. I like that. Elfbait says, I do this all the time with monsters. I've combined... Oh, I already read that. Elfbait, I am behind. Hit the wrong one. Ugh, that's what I get for scrolling up the chat to text something, so scratch that from the record. Oh, Fluffy the Griffin probably responded to my earlier question. The direness of the animal is their curse. Since they're already the animal in question, the curse just transforms them into giant rabid forms. Ah, I see. Okay, cool. As I said, me likey. I like it. Now we'll get to Plague Dr. Frankenstein. What if Dr. Frankenstein was not simply a man, also an Egyptologist? What if instead of the good doctor and his loyal servant Igor collecting bodies from the local graveyard, they were on a more daring expedition? This monster has much the same origin as the typical Frankenstein's monster, But owing to his mummified heritage, it needs to be more. What if splicing together parts from mummies, Dr. Frankenstein incurs the wrath of the Egyptian pantheon? Perhaps this mummy Frankenstein is able to call down divine power, bring forth plagues like rivers of blood, storms of locusts, or rainstorms of frogs. Dr. Frankenstein didn't just construct an undead horror this time. He brought home a series of divine plagues. Plagues. Should I read all these? Because I think we're getting the idea, which is basically to take two bits of monsters, mash them together. I think, like some folks who said in the chat, I think that's something that people often do. But what's interesting, maybe the takeaway from this particular article, as I'm just scrolling down, so I feel like we're just getting some of the same, but I'll read their conclusion. What I like here is you get the write-up of the process. He's not just looking at the powers and saying, what if I had a power to it? He's looking at the concepts, the ideas behind what those powers may be, and then picking another monster, looking at its concepts, and then seeing what you can merge together. So not just looking at, oh, look, we'll make a vampire owlbear by just putting the vampire's powers on the owlbear. It's drilling in a little closer. What does being a vampire mean symbolically, conceptually? What's the theme behind that? What's the theme behind an owlbear, if there is one? Or we could look at, and maybe in the sense where we don't know what the theme is behind an owlbear. What does it mean to be both an owl and a bear? An owl being a creature of the night and its own accord. How does that match up with a vampire? And now seeing how that comes together conceptually, and then from that concept, then you can build out a fresh set of powers, some of which may just be combinations of the ones that you've created or that are already created for you in the two creatures, but they could be something else. Isn't necessarily a duplicate of the power, but it is something that when you have this new synthetic theme, the synthesis of the two creatures themes, you get. So that's probably what I would see interesting about this article. I will read the concluding paragraphs. Perhaps one of these monster mashups piqued your curiosity, but more likely you have formulated a different monster mashup, one far better, spookier, or devious than whatever I presented. Maybe even cracked one of the combinations I didn't cover. If so, I'd like to hear about it. I generally find calls to action to comment. Oh, okay, this is basically just comment, and you get a picture of the monster mash. All right. Well done, Prismatic. I don't see any comments in there. That was from Prismatic Wasteland. Give them an upvote. Like I said, I think that my takeaway from the article, I mean, I don't have any, there's nothing wrong with the combinations I did, but I think the big takeaway is really seeing that approach of looking at the two monsters, which is good. Now let's continue scrolling down. Let's see. Oh, here's something. It's marked as theory, which will be interesting. It's entitled Dungeon Flow and What Rooms Represent in the Context of Adventure Narrative. Ooh, all right. So this was posted a day ago by Super Chives. Let's take a look. Let's see what Super Chives has on offer. Oh, no. Okay, so it's a little bit of something and then a link. We'll take a look. Okay, so first, Super Chives, who posted this a day ago. I'm 100-ish rooms into my mega dungeon project, and I'm starting to notice some design and architecture choices I'm making subconsciously and to speed up the process of making the thing. I'm pretty sure there's already a term for what this thing is, but in the context of this post and project, I'm referring to it as, quote-unquote, Dungeon Flow. It's a handy little framework that works well in both small and large-scale adventure design. All right, so I guess we'd better go see what Dungeon Flow is all about. Hey, Tunkatod. Glad you enjoy it. Glad you made it. So let's see what Dungeon Flow, what they mean here. I will post this in the chat. This is a dev journal post posted by Ave Noctis. Posted on from the 19th. Finished fall quarter and started winter quarter. Fall is filled with roving vermin and hunters with pockets of treasure, more a place to pick up some goods or restock on food. And then he's got a really messy style picture. And I'm not sure what he means by quarters, but we are kind of catching this in situ, sort of in the midst of things. So maybe we can actually skip down, because that's, I think, more about specific parts of his game. The actual dungeon flow is here below. So I'm going to skip that stuff about quarters. Let's just get down to dungeon flow. Hey, Don Rosavelli. Good day to you. Good day to you, sir. Good day. Dungeon flow. Unconsciously, I've been following a bit of a formula for the design and layout of the levels and areas of the mega dungeon. While this makes the area a little more quote-unquote game-like, sacrificing the authenticity and randomness that would be present in reality, it does provide a better flow to introduce players into an area, create and answer mysteries, and have the danger scale the deeper they go on. I've come up with some archetypes to describe the rooms and how they apply to the summer quarter in this particular mega dungeon. All right, so he has this theory, or I don't know if theory is the right word, but some kind of pattern that he's discerned. He's turning into a tool to help with mega dungeon creation, which sounds like a good thing, right? Who wouldn't want tools to help with mega dungeons if you're trying to design one? Seems like, just already glancing down, that there's a little bit of maybe a 5-room dungeon vibe to this. So the first tool, or what is he calling these? Archetypes. He's called the entry. Threshold of danger, point of return, establishment of setting. In a house, this would be the door barring the way in. In a book, this would be the title and cover. This marks the point where the relative safety of the outside stops and the danger of the dungeon begins. It allows the players the chance to stop and prepare before crossing the threshold and establishing where this dungeon is in relation to the world and where it will seemingly take place. And then it looks like referencing his particular mega dungeon. In the case of the summer quarter, this is Area B1, a stone entryway with a mural depicting a field during summer, giving it an individual identity from the other quarters. So I guess in his case, there's each quarter of his dungeon is marked for a season, right? Right. Now we get the next archetype, calls the welcome. Clues to challenges ahead, introduction of mysteries and questions, division of path. The atrium, or introduction to the dungeon. This is where the true nature of the dungeon is hinted to and provides some clues as to what challenges will be ahead. This also serves to introduce some of the mysteries and allow players to question the dungeon's purpose, history, and oddities. Finally, this is the transitory space where the dungeon begins to open up, offering different avenues to explore and paths to take, giving the players agency to plot out a course and decide where they will explore. B2, the common room, is this transitory space, referring back now to the summer quarter. There are ancient murals that have clearly been maintained over the years with images of cultists frolicking and worshipping in summer fields. There are also several places to sit, game boards, religious symbols, and a lavatory, hinting to a culture operating and functioning within this dungeon. 3 doorways sit to the north, east, and west. All right, so I am enjoying that he's giving examples, but we don't really have the context for these since we haven't been following. And I do get the sort of 5-room dungeon vibe. I think it is useful. I definitely think there is something to, I'm not usually a gamist person, so I certainly see how using these archetypes can be gamist. And yes, they don't perfectly map onto spaces that we may want to have in our dungeon. But though, to be fair, though, if you look at a lot of structures, they do follow a similar. What do? You have a doorway into a building. What do you usually see in the bottom of your ye old office building is usually a central area from which you are choosing where to go. And there's usually something about the makers of the building or the company or something like that, right? And then there are the elevators, the doors. So you do kind of see that. Or you can see when you walk into a church, oftentimes there's an antechamber that shows you things before you get into the praying areas and different things. So we it's not like these things don't exist. Castle to the courtyard, right? We can sort of see these things happen. And so it is good to think about these spaces that do exist in real life, maybe not all the time. And we might want to play around with the fact that, well, we don't always want necessarily those two areas to be complete safe zones, but wandering monsters might take care of that, or we could have some things in there. But thinking about having these areas and what it means, I think is a positive for design. All right, so now we get to the next archetypal area, the challenges. Confrontation of danger, ingenuity rewarded, safety abolished. The hallways / rooms and rising action of the dungeon. Swig of water for the working man. There is no safety or reliable shelter here. Instead, just a series of dangers and challenges to be overcome by the players. This makes up the most substantial part of a dungeon, a place where cunning actions and decisive strategies are rewarded and poor choices are met with disaster. The dungeon shows its true form here and dares the players to travel the length of its winding and twisted body. And this, of course, makes complete sense. I'm not going to read through the example here. Don Rossavelli says, realistic dungeon layouts are rare. Yeah, I can imagine. I don't even know what a realistic dungeon layout would be. I mean, if we're talking a literal dungeon place where prisoners are kept, there wouldn't be much to it, right? We don't have a lot of the same needs and things as we do in the fiction, or even just in our imaginations. So we extend the stuff and we put all kinds of crazy, wonderful concepts in these areas that, yes, in real structures just don't. They don't need to be. They don't make sense. And of course, they don't. The danger level's not there. You don't go into your average castle, and if you leave it alone for a few months, it's filled with wandering terrors. Caves seem to work out best, Don says. Yeah, sure. I mean, I like them all. I have a hard time designing dungeons that, quote unquote, don't make sense. Flavor the Grimmett says, realistic fantasy always seems like an oxymoron. Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I think... So when you get into kind of dungeon design, I guess there's the funhouse dungeon, and maybe I would call it the thematic dungeon, just to be super broad. And I haven't thought about these terms at all, so I might come back later and say, these terms don't really work. But a funhouse dungeon, or at least where the name comes from, right? I don't think people came up with this was a concept, a name that came up to describe dungeons that were already existing. Not that they started with the concept and went outwards. This was looking back at it and look at all these dungeons. You go, wow, that's kind of a funhouse dungeon. In those cases, right, they're not. The concept of funhouse dungeon or the labels is supplied because the dungeon, however fun it is, is not about a value judgment whether it's good or bad, but that things don't really make sense. There's a whole cornucopia of stuff that seems to be just thrown in there as if you were in a funhouse. It's not about the fun of the dungeon. The idea of the dungeon is not about it making sense. And I think a lot of the mega dungeons, especially things like Castle Greyhawk, you go on the 8th level and there's a giant bowling alley. Does that make sense in your average fantasy campaign? No, it doesn't. That is kind of a fun house. And the classic Wandering Monster table probably also will give things a funhouse feel because you never know what might show up, and what might show up may have nothing to do with whatever theme you're establishing about the dungeon. It just happens to be here. You maybe add a tick in the funhouse direction on the spectrum. Of course, that is assuming you are not creating your own wandering monster encounters that are thematic. Now, on the thematic side, we have dungeons this is supposed to be the lair of the goblins. So the only things that are going to be in here are things that match that fictional context, either of the goblin culture themselves or other things from the world that realistically might be there. So you might run into another group of adventurers in the goblin caves, but that's because they're doing the same thing you are doing, which is trying to fulfill the bounty on getting rid of the goblins in the caves. Something of that. You're not just going to run into randomly a cleric of Orcus who just happens to be kind of hiding in a corner, or a red dragon. Those things aren't there because it doesn't match the fictional context. I don't actually know that the ones in the fictional context, the more thematic dungeons, whether they ultimately make a ton of sense, they don't have to make all the sense in the world. They just have to make enough sense that I can buy in my imagination being there. I think that's when we say when they make sense. I would say, yeah, my dungeons, I think, make sense as far as dungeons go. If I plunked it out in the real world and said, here it is, does it make sense? Probably not. It's probably very would be very inefficient as an actual space, but it works in terms of the game. And that's kind of where I try to be. Let's see. Elfbait in the chat says, almost all my dungeons end up being either natural places, structures, or ruins of structures. Yeah. But I would say that, and maybe Elfbait, maybe you're different than I am. I would say that probably I take a ruined structure and I put stuff around it and down below it, probably ends up not having that much in common with a real world ruined structure, right? The ruined castle probably doesn't have, if I just go to Europe, pick random ruined castle, probably doesn't have 10 underground floors attached to it, 10 underground levels attached to it. And probably my design for even above ground of the castle is probably a little bit more, I don't know, has a little bit more complexity to it than probably a real world castle layout, but it's be close enough that the players in my game aren't going, hey, wait a minute, it doesn't look like any castle I've ever been in, because we don't really have that much experience with it, so things can pass. Let's see. Elfbait also says there is fantastic and there is nonsensical. This is true, and that is a fine line sometimes. Let's see. Don says, when at the table using tiles or drawing a map, we'll see. Revealing room by room helps make it more real, I guess. Yeah, catacombs are different, but catacombs don't usually sprawl out the way and have all the stuff in them, right? Catacombs are pretty much just catacombs. Let's see. True. Elfbait responded to my castle example, says, but if the castle is of previous age and buried by the ravages of time, yes. I would say even then, though, you're probably not getting the sort of livable spaces with livable creatures in them doing things that, say, a Mayan ruined pyramid that's built on top of another Mayan ruined pyramid that's built on top of another Mayan ruined pyramid works out. But we're trying to pretend we're in a fantastical space, so we can take some things. I think as long as you hit that suspension of disbelief where you're not pushing that, as long as you remain in the area where someone can kind of close their eyes, picture in their brains, and sort of make sense, you're good. I don't ask for much more than that. All right, so we did the challenges. Let me get put the link back up there. Okay, now we're on to the secrets. This is another archetype. Mysteries answered, tools provided, curiosity rewarded. The hidden nooks and anecdotal stories, something unique to the dungeon as a medium. These are the smaller details and areas obscured and tucked away to be discovered. They provide answers to some of the mysteries posed by the dungeon and offer tools to overcome the trials ahead. They are rewards for the curious and tenacious and provide a greater picture of the dungeon to those who seek it out. Now, this one, I will do the example here. He gives from his work in progress. B5, the Stonecarver's Workshop, shows the importance of stonecraft and masks to the cultists as well as the magical abilities of some. B8, Scriptorium, is a collection of histories and scrolls, can be sold to a scholar above, that reveals the extensive history of the cultists and the erosion of the underground city. B9, the Faceless, an NPC who was punished for even suggesting an exploration of the surface, and now offers information if the players help them to escape the surface. A lot of uses of the surface there. B15, Temple Meeting Room, depicts a wall of icon paintings that show the cultists' slow change into the monstrous forms they have now, revealing them each to be hundreds of years old and not simple monsters. So basically, these areas, we have these secrets, which would be these archetypal rooms that provide context for the dungeon. And some of it may seem to be too simple, or we think, oh, aren't we giving it away, right? Or isn't it giving it away to have this mural that shows the cultists slowly transforming into the monsters they are now, right? Because you might think, well, why would the monsters, is that important to them? Do they really feel that they need to show that prospect? Maybe they would do something else. But I find these things work. I like to include things like that. I always think back to that kind of really, they don't explain it all, at least in the movie of the Neverending Story, when Atreyu at the end ends up in this ruin, and in the ruin is a similar mural or bas relief that shows all the events that have happened, including what's about to happen. It clearly has some kind of magic effect. I like those things. It's nice. And I think those things are nice. I think that people, especially in times if you weren't a a text-based society, or maybe even if you were like the ancient Egyptians who had plenty of scrolls, but they also felt like they wanted to last the test of time, really etch their names and etch their symbols and etch their works and deeds, into stone. So I can see it. Elpate says historical cultures reflected a good amount of mundanity into their art, so why not? Yep, indeed, exactly. Throw that stuff in there, even if you might feel like. I think sometimes what happens with GMs, and I know I've mentioned this before, you're afraid of being too easy. You're afraid of being too simple. I want it to be a harder puzzle. I want them to have to think about it, but trust me, you think the stuff that you think is simple, they're not going to think it's simple. And when the PCs see that and they start to have their minds go, ooh, like, what does it mean? What does it show? I feel like it's all worth it. And you could always riff on it or do something different if you're afraid that I'm really giving it all away. Well, there can be something else there. But I almost always don't think you really lose much by being at the line or there at the giving it all away point, because there's always something else. Next archetype, the throne. This is the final challenge, culmination of dangers and mysteries. The main hall and climax, a final climactic showdown with a singular challenge that represents the distillation of the dungeon's dangers and mysteries. This is the last hurdle players may overcome, and defeating it is effectively defeating the dungeon. So this one probably feels the most gamey to me, but I think it can definitely work, and I think you can think about in a lot of levels of a dungeon. You might think about, what do they mean, right? We're creating our mega dungeon or even our normal dungeon, and we have level 1 is the level where all the vermin and the scavengers are. The things that are really working have worked past through this, but maybe this is where their garbage is. Maybe this is just the easiest entry point. This is where they're taking craps and doing whatever nonsense, throwing away their trash. So here's where you're going to find the giant rats and the giant centipedes and maybe some other things skulking around in that matter. Maybe you get down to level 2. We're going to say that this was the original catacombs, or this was a level of catacombs. Or actually, to go back up. So we back up on that first level. We might think about, okay, we're trying to get down to the second level. Maybe that second level, just by chance, the stairs happen to be in the nest of the sort of master nest of the giant centipede. So we might even create a monster. It's like a giant centipede hive mother or tribe mother or group mother, whatever. Something bigger, nastier. Put a bunch of giant centipede larvae and things in there. And that kind of creates a culminating moment, right? But it is something that we were establishing. It is thematic on that level. Then, like I said, then we go down one more level, and we get down through there, and we get into what would have been the catacombs area, and of course we can have all kinds of undead in there, things of that nature. And then maybe to get down to the final level where the evil cultists are hanging out trying to do their ritual, that the secret entrance into this final level is through one of the largest sarcophagi, and in that chamber there is an extra difficult undead in here. And there's your thing. So so on the one hand, I feel like, this throne idea, when I think about it, generally feels kind of gamey. But the other hand, in this dungeon center I just laid out, I don't know that if I played through that, I would think it was gamey, even though it is providing those same things. We're having one area that's a culmination of everything coming before it, and it kind of leads to the next area. 2 different ways. Maybe at some point I want to switch them around. Maybe I probably wouldn't put all the exits right by the big bad guy, but we can think about in those terms. And I think as an exercise, trying to make sure you kind of have these things, I think it is cool in a dungeon to have sort of a more major challenge. It doesn't even have to be, in my mind, thinking it's kind of sandbox dungeons. It doesn't even have to be in the main way. The party might be able to, in a different dungeon, never come across the lair of the giant centipede queen, but they might wonder why every time they come through here there are tons more giant centipedes. That every time they kill some, they're not going away, and if they really followed it through, they could find the giant centipede queen. It might be a lair thing with some lair treasures, right? Something like that. But I think it's an interesting thing to think about. Let's see. Fluffy the Griffin says, unless you completely write out, the players will never get it. Secrets only frustrate. Yep. And they frustrate everybody. Secrets frustrate you as a GM as well because you want your party to discover the stuff. Usually, you're biting your thumb like, oh, please discover my secret. And then as players, yeah, it's either frustrating or you just toss your hands up and go, I guess it doesn't matter, and you move on. All right, just a little more water there. I don't think we have to go through the throne. I think it's pretty self-evident. And then the final archetypal or archetype here we get is the vault. Reward for confronting danger, answers / poses questions, a reflection of the dungeon. The treasure room or resolution to the dungeon, a place that offers a tangible reward for the player's ingenuity and cunning, whether they discovered it through violence, enforce or pacifism and subterfuge. The vault offers both answers to the questions the players might have or pose additional ones that require further exploration. As well, the treasures are a reflection and memento of the dungeon to be carried out into the world, a piece of mystery, challenges, and tone of the dungeon distilled into art, artifact, or knowledge. And again, I like this. Right? Makes sense. And you may find that you don't always want to have all these in your dungeon, and it doesn't make sense. And they're not going to have this. But I do think it is good to think about these things on a conceptual level, because in the world builder mode of a GM, it's fine to have things have purposes. Oftentimes in the real world, things have specific purposes, and I think we can easily find analogs for most of these in the real world. So it's not like people don't think of these things either intentionally if they were creating a space that was meant to be experienced, or even unintentionally because they serve other goals. I do think this definitely feels like the 5-room dungeon just distilled into maybe an extra room or two. Let me see how many archetypes we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, I think the 5-room dungeon basically covers pretty much the same ground, but you might like this concept having 6 things better. And of course, in this case, they're specifically using this technique, right, to enhance conventional dungeon design, not forget the dungeon design in terms of using the 5-room dungeon. But hey, Bob Mosdel's here. Welcome, Bob. I think Mike Shea's method of secrets is helpful. Come up with the details of the secret, but not the exact method of delivery. And he adds, then do a Justin Alexander on it and make sure you're 3 times redundant with each secret. Yeah, I even go probably more redundant than that. I haven't heard that method of coming up with secrets, Bob. If you've got a link, throw it in the comments or chat somewhere. I can check it out, or I'll try Google searching for it later. But that sounds good to me. All right, well, let me make sure. Let me give an upvote for this, or let me see if there's any comments here that are more than just, hey, great. Classic Emotion 9405 says, sounds a bit like the Mario level design philosophy. I'll have to check that out later. I'll save that. And then Victoria Chan says, Central Casting Dungeons uses the word construction quite a lot in reference to the template and formula for designing a dungeon. If you just mean the first room, then Gygax and Kuntz call it a quote-unquote starter, and Central Casting calls it an original entry. Don't know if that's exactly what you're asking. Your miles may vary. I don't think that's quite what they're on, Victoria Chan, but I'll give you a vote just the same. All right. What are we looking at time? I think we got. All right. Actually, I feel like we're in a good place time-wise. Oh, here we got variant rules for caving. We got to check that one out. Oh, I think he's looking for it. Never mind. He was looking for rules, not supplying rules. I think he put the wrong flag there. He's looking for something called low life. All right. That's a bummer. I'll take an upvote anyway, but looking for something better. All right, here we go. Warlock class, old school sense of BX, looking for feedback. I think someone might have even Are multiple people coming up with it? Warlock class? Okay, so maybe this is someone who's been iterating through their Warlock class design. Posted by Jordan_RR. Hi everyone, one of my players is interested in playing a Warlock, inspired for the one in 5th edition in my open table, so I designed a class. He likes it, but I like feedback from the community. Thanks in advance. I guess it comes in 2 pages. All right. Let me post a link. I'll post a link to the Reddit post. That way people can figure out the rest for themselves. They'd like to check it out as I'm going through this. Warlock class Reddit post. There we go. All right, now let's go into page 1. Zoom in there a bit. Requirements: Constitution 9, prime requisite, charisma and wisdom. Hit dice, D4, armor none, weapons, dagger, the patron's paraphernalia, see below. And then you get languages, you get alignment, you get common, and then secret language of their occult servants. I'm guessing so whatever your patron has a secret language. Here's the sort of fluff. Warlocks are adventurers who made a pact with an otherworldly creature to get occult powers in exchange for their soul. The pact is transactional in nature. Warlocks do not have to serve, but they always have to pay. The body of a warlock shows signs of this pact reflecting the nature of their patron. They are usually subtle but grow more overt as they gain levels. Yeah, that's pretty standard from 5th edition. I have noticed, which I think is good, that they have made more evident the fact that the warlock does not have to obey the patron. That's in the 5th edition description, though it gets overlooked a lot. They made a one-time, basically, here's my soul, here's the power. The patrons, unless you and the player wants to, do not have some kind of day-to-day impact on the warlock's powers. It's kind of done and done. It's not a connection, it's a transaction. Alignment. A warlock cannot be lawful. If the character's alignment ever changes for any reason, they lose all class abilities, but combat ability, hit dice, saving throws, and XP progression. The referee may allow the character to strike a new bargain with their patron to regain their status as a warlock. That's interesting, because I might have thought that maybe you would have to be the same alignment as your patron. But this is fine, too. It's certainly, I can see this as being an action of chaos, and in that you are going against the natural order of things, right? You have diminished your spiritual self to augment your physical self in unnatural ways that go against the natural order of things. So it makes sense to me. Linky says, or another patron. Yep, potentially you could get another patron. Prime requisite, a warlock with at least 13 charisma and 13 wisdom gains. Okay, just the percentages to experience. That's fine. Combat warlocks cannot wear armor and cannot use shields. Their choice of weapons is limited to daggers and to their patron's paraphernalia. That also seems fine. Occult magic. Here we go. Spell casting. From 2nd level, warlocks learn spells from their patron. The level progression table opposite shows the number of spells the warlock knows, which I think must be on the other page. Thus, a 2nd level warlock knows 1 spell selected by the referee may allow the player to choose. Warlocks can get spells from any spell list. A warlock can cast any spell they know. After the spell takes effect, the warlock uses 1 hit point per level of the spell cast and rolls 1d6. On a 1, nothing else happens. Otherwise, they lose the ability to cast spells of a level of their choice until they get a full night's sleep. It does not have to be the level of the spell cast. Okay, that's interesting. So there's a hit point price for casting the spell, and almost every time, but there's a 1 in 6 chance that you don't get to, you're going to lose a level of spells. Of course, if you're only a level 2 warlock, you only have 1 spell level to lose, so you're done. First level spells for the day. Patron's paraphernalia. A warlock can instantly summon a weapon to their hand, treated like a spear, and an armor equivalent to plate mail on themselves. If the weapon is no longer held by the warlock, they can instantly summon it back to their hand. The weapon and armor weigh nothing, and their clearly unnatural appearance are appropriate to the nature of the warlock's patron. The weapon is treated as magical for resistance purposes. At the end of the turn, the paraphernalia disappears, and the warlock loses 1 hit point. Oh, I'm not sure about this one. I'm not sure I dig that. Fluffy the Griffin says, this feels a bit too defining to me. Other OSE classes are more framework, but this is a lot of really specific features that define how you play. I think it's because they're trying to get that 5th edition, right? They are trying to dictate because they're looking for a specific feel. They probably could write this in a way that is less like that, more framework-y. But I think they are trying to go for something specific. Also, Fluffy the Grim says, charging hit points to do things is I'm going to tell you what, that I like. And the reason why I like it is because it has that vibe of some of the spellcasters in classic films had. I'm thinking of, there's a couple of Sinbad films where he has sorcerers or warlocks or sorcerers. Some other magic using type is the main antagonist, and how those spellcasters drain their essence, they age themselves, they take on physical harm to do things. That's the price they pay. If anything, I would say with hit points, on the one hand, it feels it's very temporary. You have 1d4 hit points. Starting warlock, 1 to 4 hit points. So you can't do a whole lot, and it's going to grow. Your ability to do things is going to grow pretty slowly because you want to keep some hit points in reserve in case you actually get hit by a weapon. And by the way, at first level or second level, you could easily be within 1 weapon's hit of dying under the best of circumstances. Once you start using actions, you're dropping down. On the second hand, you're going to get most of those back, and as you go up levels, they're going to come back even easier, and you potentially have health potions, whatever. I might actually like doing something like draining one of your attributes to do it, which means you get to do more stuff off the bat. Of course, you can figure out different rates of draining, so to kind of even it out. But at the same time, those are a lot harder to get back. And I think classically, right, you'd have to drink a magic fountain to get things back. But I would make it some way temporary, but maybe it takes weeks to recharge, and it's not an overnight recharge. But yeah, I don't actually find that meh. I just think there might be other ways to do things. Bob Mosdell mentions Elric. Yep, exactly. Let's see. Okay, so here we have another. I think the thing is, I would say here is you're getting kind of a lot of powers. I don't like the patron's paraphernalia. You being able to get heavy armor and a magic weapon for 1 hit point, but you get it at first level. I'm not sure. And treated like a spear, does that mean you could throw it? So you could sit there and basically have Mjolnir, like, yeah, and it's just coming back to your hand. I think that's a little bit much. I kind of feel like they're trying to get the feel of a few of the different subclasses or pacts all at once. Maybe, and maybe I don't love that so much. So that's probably something I would change or maybe get rid of, or make it cost a lot more, or unlock it that, oh yeah, when you're a superhero, you're 8th level, then you get that little pizzazz. Or maybe 4th level, maybe not 1st level. Servants from another world. Warlocks can ask servants from their patron, which are treated as retainers. These servants can be any creature appropriate to the patron, as determined by the referee. If they lack a class, treat their HD as their level. Each asterisk counts as another HD for this. So they're gonna get a share of golden XP. They can use their secret language. I don't think I would have this because it's a weird. I'm not sure what this is supposed to fit in with. If you're playing OSR already, hirelings are a thing. Why do these guys need magic hirelings? And on the one hand, we've said that the service between a warlock and their patron is transactional. They 1 for 1. you're giving me all this power, and I'm really just unlocking, and almost the power that you're getting back from the patron, or you're getting from the patron, is simply, it's kind of like the One Ring, right? In Lord of the Rings, you have to be of certain power levels to just appreciate what you have. So that gives you the level progression. He gave it to you all at once, but you only can really tap into it once you've reached certain personal growth milestones, let's say, and you've given up your soul in exchange. Fine. But now the servants thing is kind of asking you that you're reaching out to your patron again, which suggests an ongoing relationship. So it doesn't really jibe with the other one, because if you're asking them for servants, you're kind of asking them for favors, and you kind of got to be on good terms with them, and it portrays a different kind of relationship, I think. And I don't know in an OSR sense why you need it. I would rather have that you had some kind of charm person spell like thing. It can work for months, and you can use that, and you can just use that on, it only works on level 0 creatures, and you can only have so many under your control. So if you want to go and get those kind of thralls to work for you, then that would be that. And then you can just use basically kind of like the charm person sort of spell, something similar to that. I don't feel like this is necessary. So I guess, to go back to who was its point about Fluffy the Griffin talking about how maybe it's a little bit more defining, I could see easily converting this to more of, and we'll see the next page, to more of a framework by really just looking at it. And this is a spellcasting class that isn't memorizing spells. They're interfacing with spells using their life essence. If we think about a classic magic user is using just its brain memories, and that's why it's consumed when you cast it, because it literally is pulling it out of your brain, then this kind of caster is saying, no, I want to keep that pattern in my brain. I'm going to instead, you're going to pull out this kind of essence, some life force for me to do it. I like that. Some of this other stuff on the side, maybe unnecessary, and I don't love it. But I do appreciate that they are trying to get a specific look and feel for this. Let's look at page 2. Seems like they're... All right, so then we get the spell progression. They look like they sort of have I imagine it's something like the cleric's spell list, but they never get more. They never get more than... They can never get any level or 5 or 6 spells. They're limited to levels 1 through 4. They have another ability or characteristic here: void of soul. The soul of the warlock is with their patron, leaving a void where it was. The body of the patron is animated by the power of their patron. A warlock cannot have a soul animate their body. If the character gets one, however they do, they lose all class abilities, but combat, okay. So basically, your soul's not there, so you can't have one. If you were to finagle some way to get somebody else's soul, or some third-party soul for hire, into your body, you lose all your stuff. All right, I don't know if that's sure. I mean, did we need to put that in there? I don't know, but I guess it's not a bad thing that it's very plain. A soul that is not here and that is not mine. The warlock is immune to effects targeting their soul, but cannot do things that require a soul, as determined by the referee. Unless a deal is struck with the patron, reincarnating or raising a warlock from the dead means robbing their soul from the patron to animate a body. Well, that's interesting. I might have phrased it differently, but the idea that maybe you can't reanimate or truly resurrect a warlock because they don't have their soul. You can't beg their soul to come back in their body because it's gone. So that is definitely interesting. And then certainly you set some different. If you did need to reincarnate a warlock, what does that look like? What would a patron want to either reconnect or give some other power, or put the soul back? But then if you put the soul back, it's not a warlock anymore. So then that's all gone. So you might have to, might be some interesting, it is an interesting, not really edge case problem, because resurrecting things, bringing things back from the dead in different ways can be fairly common. So that's probably a good call out. And I do like the fact that it does suggest not just that, nope, they can't be resurrected, but that, oh, there might be a way to do it, but you might have to get on some adventuring, dealing with the warlock patron to do it. Echoes of mind. The warlock can touch one soul to their void, which lets them telepathically communicate. The target must be seen by the warlock to establish contact and be no further than 60 feet to maintain it. Only one soul can be touched at once, but the warlock can touch a different one each round. The target might feel queasy, but there's no other ill effect. They must share a language to understand each other. Yeah, I'm not digging that one. No, I don't think that is necessary. I feel like they're loading up on how many abilities this bad boy gets now. I kind of like the idea that soul stuff that targets souls. I don't know what they would be. Won't really work. And also, by the way, resurrection may be impossible. That's a nice little note. But this other stuff of giving them kind of other powers based on it, I'm not feeling it. And here's another one. See how this one reads. Stare of the abyss. The warlock can look in the eyes of a creature no further than 10 feet, making them stare at the abyss where their soul should be. The target feels attacked and must make a morale roll. Per the rule, creatures succeeding at 2 morale rolls will fight to the death. This ability equivalent to casting a spell for the purpose of the combat procedure. Oh, that doesn't sound very good. But yeah, I don't think you need it. It's like a super intimidation. Feels a bit much. Finally, we have stealing shreds of light. When the warlock kills a creature, a figment of the victim's soul is sucked in the warlock's void. The warlock gains 1 hit point per HD of the victim. For creatures of less than 1 HD, enough must be killed at the same time to have this effect. Killing creatures lacking a soul does not have this effect. This adds, I think what they're doing is we're getting all these subclass kind of powers, I'm guessing, or variations of them in this. And it's too much for one. Maybe pick one, choose one, depending on your patron. And there's no word about different patrons. Choose a style of patron, and then maybe you get one of these things. Getting all of them, too much. It's too much. Fluffy the Griffin says, yeah, this class has a pile of abilities. I think this whole page could be ignored and the class will be fine. Yeah, that's what I was thinking when I turned to this class. I'm like, oh, guys, this is just going to have the advancement table. Nope, it's got, 1, 2, 3, 4 more powers. And then you can build a stronghold at 11th level. There you go. Linkian says, it seems like they're adding some version of all the abilities from each pack type. Yeah, I think you need to pick your packs. That is too much for one. Wyvern let me not forget to give an upvote. Then Wyvern comments on the Reddit. This is just my 2 copper pieces. Your version seems way too complex for a BX class. I would recommend Wizard XP and saves. No armor beyond leather. Only a dagger. Requirements of Con 9. Prime requisite Con. 1d6 HD. Thief. Thaco. And use of 1d4 cantrip. The biggest benefit of the cantrip is that it requires no encumbrance of carrying ammo, and it is unlimited ammo. This can be huge in early games, but less helpful later on. Again, this is what I would be interested in for a warlock, something very simple. So they're basically thinking, giving that what's that one ability of the warlock has that they can do over and over again? They have some spell they can cast. I forget the name. They're basically suggesting throwing that on there. Oh, Eldritch Blast. Yeah. But I don't know that we need to give them Eldritch Blast. I guess it really depends, right? Don't wizards in 5th edition also have cantrips they can fire every round? So I would think that if you're coming to the OSR, you're giving up this concept that you as a magic user get something to do every round. You might be giving that up, depending on your flavor of OSR. And if you're doing that, then I don't think you need to worry about the cantrip. I think the more fun things about the warlock are the things with the patron, getting kind of powers, and paying for them in a different way than other spellcasters. Other people mentioned Eldritch Blast. Yep. Fluffy the Griffin says, I was looking at a warlock design that more mimics the DCC patron pack system. You get a handful of spells up front that are unique and no one else has depending on the patron. That's it. Yeah. I haven't looked at that DCC one. Maybe I can look at it sometime. But yeah, that's probably more along where I would go with it. Lincoln says I'd give them a ranged dex attack, D6 Eldritch Blast, since it's kind of the core to the idea of the 5e warlock. This is where you have to talk to the player, right? So the one thing in not that I say this person needs defense, but just it seems like they're doing this for a specific player who wants a specific feel for the warlock. My idea of the warlock is based more on the thematic part. Ooh, the pact, and maybe you get something a little bit special, and you've got a patron. Maybe this player, what they think is special is having your pew pew Eldritch Blast attack. So certainly, if that's what they want, if they were in my game and I know, what they really want is being able to Eldritch Blast all day long, then I might think about a way to do something closer to that. If it's more about the thematic feel, then I think my other thing, I would try to dip into the theme. I'm not a big fan of a pew pew Eldritch Blast, so I probably would have to try to figure out something else I could do. but that's me. Elplay says, I would lean into the more traditional folkloric aspects of witches for warlock class, curses, forbidden knowledge, etc. Make them a weird cobbling of some thief abilities and limited casting. Yeah, I definitely would. I agree with that to the extent that I would want to maybe pick one particular legend, tradition, folklore tale that I like and go with that, and then pick their powers out of that, which I actually started to do for one of the ones from the Sinbad movie, because they do some very specific things, and they have some specific abilities, but it doesn't seem like they can just do anything they want. And I do like what I've always found the hard part balancing this concept of the warlock that I really think is cool. Over the course of the movie, these warlocks, if we're going to use that term, are constantly weakening themselves, constantly giving up their essences. In the movie, sometimes part of what they're trying to get at the end of the movie is the thing that will make them more powerful, but also undo all the things they've done. So, if I get this jewel, then I'll be able to get immense amount of power. And with that power, I can basically I can get my body back. That's kind of why I would like taking something like, hey, you have con damage. It'll take you weeks to get over. Maybe you have them roll some die, and if you roll bad enough, it is lost. Or you're aging or something else where you can start to see those effects that you might not get back. I'd want to keep that, but I wouldn't want them to just have one go of it. Hey, you have 9 constitution, so now you get 9 shots at this, and then at the end of it, you're a vegetable. You're done. I'd want to have some recovery, but I wouldn't mind having some danger. But I've had a hard time trying to figure how that's going to actually work in the game, and I get stuck there a lot. Flavor the Griffin says, that's a neat idea. Now I want to create an arcane trickster in BX. Linkian says, actually, the mage class from Carcass Crawler #1 might be a good starting point. It uses thief-style skill abilities to make a very Gandalf-like wizard. That's cool. I don't have Carcass Crawler #1, but I might need to check that out. Well, as we appear to be at the top of the hour, it is time to say goodbye. Before you guys all leave, please give a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. If you came late, it'll be up on YouTube. You should be able to rewind in the beginning so you can check it out. If you wandered in here and you're like, man, this is a great conversation, I'd like to be a part of it more often, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I don't know. You get subscribed, you get updates. I think there's a bell thing too. I don't know if it's the same as subscribe or different, but you can hit that if you want more notifications. I do post stuff in my channel community tab, so you'll get updates. Usually it's what I'm going to stream. Any last thoughts on this warlock class, or anything else we've looked at before I close it down for the day? And also have a great weekend, everybody, if I don't get a chance to say that, or if I forget. Final call. All right, I'm going to call that a stream. Game on, everybody. Have a good weekend.